At 14:07 local, Foxtrot Alpha 18 Super Hornets were screaming full throttle toward three irreplaceable Iranian airframes at Kerman Airport. High above, a loitering eye in the sky fed live telemetry to the strike group, and the picture looked grim. The Iranians were scrambling to get those high-value birds airborne before the strike could hammer the tarmac. Just as the rhinos plugged in their blowers, an Iranian operator decided to try and put their faces on a commemorative t-shirt. Both pilots, Raven 1 and 2, carved a wide arc through the Volusia corridor to skirt the known threat rings. The terrain offered no cover. Raven 1's Alpha Lima Romeo 67, the digital soul that senses hunters, began to scream. It wailed with a high PRF pulse, a signature every stick monkey dreads. A phased array radar locking its teeth in. A Tormike 1 battery, lurking within 12 kilometers, had been playing dead in the foothills with its sensors dark. It was the air defense version of a silent bouncer lurking in a shadow-choked corner of a club. Stone-faced, arms folded, ignoring the pleasantries and just watching the entrance for trouble. The second the Hornets cleared the ridge, the system bypassed the handshake and went straight for the throat. No who goes there, just a lead pipe to the jaw before you even step inside. Raven 1 reacted instantly. Left hand slapped the countermeasures, right hand white-knuckled the stick. Picture a Mach 2.8 telephone pole pulling 28 Gs. That is 4 times the structural limit of a human spine before the brain flickers out into darkness. The radar's phased array skips frequencies like a polyglot switching dialects midword to confuse the jammer's ears. After 11 days of attrition, the surviving crews had mastered exactly one desperate survival tactic. Pickle 1, kill the power, and vanish before the American retaliatory strike hits. Raven 1 yanked the stick, pulling 6 Gs. The Earth swapped places with the sky as the Alpha Lima 47 vomited a cloud of radar-reflecting chaff. Glass fibers blossomed into a digital ghost, while the Alpha Lima Quebec 214 jammer pumped out rhythmic lies. The electronic deception successfully baited the missile into detonating 500 meters in the empty wake. Raven 2 banked hard, forcing the battery to flip a coin on which pilot to kill. They chose number 1. The combination of digital noise and a 6G brake turn yanked the jet out of the Seeker's lethal prediction cone. The warhead blossomed into a fireball well below and behind the tailpipes, hitting nothing but air. Fragmentation peppered the slipstream close enough to vibrate the airframe as the Iranian commander killed the master switch. Beneath the surface, the driver was already engaging tracks to reposition before the retaliation arrived. A week prior, he would have fired again, but 11 days of seeing Iran become a parking lot inspired caution. Yet, the Tor system didn't need a kill. It only needed to steal 45 seconds of their mission. That 6G defensive break pushed them 12 miles off course, right into the gaze of a hidden surveillance radar. The operator had hidden his mobile rig near Izvestan, tucked into terrain the coalition had deemed a low priority. A move fueled by either brilliant tactical initiative or terminal paranoia. In Tehran's military doctrine, those two traits are practically synonymous. He lacked the teeth to shoot, but he didn't need them. He keyed the mic, reporting 2 high-energy returns burning northeast on his scope. They were at medium altitude, flying with the predatory focus of someone about to ruin a general's afternoon. That intel traveled via landline, since 11 days of pounding had turned their wireless net into a joke. The message hit the IRGC garrison just as the Ravens were desperately trying to reform their element. While the warning data raced toward the target airfield, the jets were already suffering from the engagement. Raven 2 realized what 6Gs had done to his targeting pod's fiber optic brain, which usually keeps the picture stable. 15 seconds of high-gravity maneuvering had knocked those sensitive gyroscopes completely out of alignment. The infrared feed was now a jittery mess, like squinting at a sign through a vibrating bus window. He toggled the pod to standby to reset the system, but the tremors remained. Raven 2 was blind. What he wouldn't learn until he was back on the deck of the Lincoln was that the hardware was physically shattered. The violent 6G snap had microfractured the fiber optic coupler, killing the reference laser's soul. The pod wasn't just drifting, it was hallucinating. Low-altitude flight was now the only way to lock on, but dropping below 15,000 feet meant dancing inside the kill zone of every IRGC short-range shooter left. That Tor battery hadn't just forced a miss, it had herded them into a much larger trap. It had effectively gouged out Raven 2's eyes, forcing him to descend into the lethal altitude where the ground-based killers thrive. At Kerman, a ground controller snatched a field phone mid-ring, processed the intel for 4 seconds, and bolted across the tarmac. Bandits inbound, fuel tankers yanked their chocks and scurried away within heartbeats. A scramble time that would have humbled any air force on the planet, considering these crews had spent 11 days watching American smart munitions turn their facility into a gallery of burning modern art. Inside the pressurized skin of the cockpit, the flight engineer was frantically dancing across the overhead toggles, waking the APU from its slumber. The grueling 4 to 5 minute labor of feeding compressed air into the 4 Solovia turbofans, roughly 90 seconds of gasping per engine. If the gears held, that Il-76 would be rolling before the Americans could knock. 8,000 meters away at Creech Air Force Base, a Reaper sensor operator watched the hive stir through a god-eye view. The operator keyed the sat link. Target is twitching, the Heavy is gasping for air. When the Reaper hit its bingo fuel state after 20 hours on station, a duration longer than most humans remain conscious, the bird finally went thirsty. The operator swept the apron one last time, time-stamped the frame, and banked south toward Djibouti. The feed died, replaced by silent sand. The relief Reaper was still 30 minutes out. The Ravens were 25 minutes away. For those 5 blind minutes, the American eye was shut over Cayman while the Il-76 crew bled through their checklist in total secrecy. But here is the critical intel the Americans missed during those 5 minutes of darkness. The Il-76 wasn't just spooling its soul to escape the coming fire. Ground crews were shoving crates into the cargo mall, long, olive-drab boxes that didn't appear on any standard shipping manifest. Whatever the IRGC was desperate to extract from Cayman was clearly worth more than the airframe itself. The chaos at Al Udeid's Combined Air Operations Center, Divine Air Traffic Control for the theater, kept the Ravens on a short leash. Zero ISR coverage meant zero permission to pickle a weapon. A standard rule that makes perfect sense 900 miles away where the coffee is hot and ejection seats are purely theoretical, but feels like a death sentence when you're burning precious JP-8 in a tight orbit. At Cayman, those same 5 minutes bought the garrison every second they needed to survive. The controller had Zu-23 gun trucks screaming from the motor pool before the first orbit was even complete. By minute 3, a MESA-2 team was perched on the maintenance hangar roof, the launch tube biting into the operator's shoulder. The MESA-2 is Tehran's bootleg of the Chinese QW-1, which was itself a counterfeit of the Russian Igla, making it a photocopy of a photocopy. And like any third-generation knockoff, it works just well enough to turn your afternoon into a disaster. The Relief Reaper checked in at 23,000 feet, an MQ-9 sporting the multispectral targeting brain you see here, sharp enough to read the fine print on a license plate from 4 miles up, piloted by a guy in a Creech trailer using a gold-plated Xbox setup with a 600 millisecond satellite stutter. The operator slewed the turret toward the apron, and the image snapped into focus. 3 confirmed. The Heavy's APU was screaming hot. Recommend immediate. Hold released. 16 minutes to impact. The crippled sensor pod and that 5-minute blind spot, both gifts from the Tor M1. We're waiting at the finish line. Raven 1 swept the airfield, hunting for the maximum range of his digital vision. The advanced targeting infrared pod slung under the jet's belly, the soul catcher picture here is essentially a thermal telescope. It allows a pilot to dissect a target from a distance where the guys on the ground can't even dream of shooting back. Lead's pod gave him a crystal clear feed, the kind of surgical picture engineers designed targeting systems to hallucinate. 2 technicals with twin-barrel Zu-23 anti-air guns sat at opposite ends of the strip like gargoyles. The Zu-23 spits 23mm lead at 1,000 rounds per barrel. No radar signature on the RWR, it is the AK-47 of anti-aircraft warfare. The gunner doesn't calculate lead, he just lets it rip and prays for a lucky hit. 70 meters from the P-3F, the MAN-PADS operator was glowing like a hot coal on the Reaper's infrared feed. Raven 1 watched the tube settle on his shoulder, calculating the intercept. Between the Zu-23 shredding the air and the MESA-2 thirsty for engine heat, command was a lethal equation. Attack from on high and Chinese GPS jamming muffles the bomb's brain until it misses. Come in low, and the ground defenses tear your throat out. Their GBU-38J DAMS 500-pound GPS hammers usually boast a 5-meter margin of error. That puts the weapon right through the fuselage. But under the thick soup of Chinese jamming around Iranian fields, that circle swells to 25 meters. Fine for a building? Against a plane, that's just a pothole on the taxiway while the target limps to safety. The only way to sharpen the blade was to drop lower, slashing the flight time from 90 seconds to 30, less time for the bomb to get confused, more chance to splash the target. Dropping lower meant dancing with the Zu-23 and the MSA-2 ceiling. The Tor M1's 45-second clock was still ticking. Raven 1 initiated his dive at 12,000 feet. Sensor locked on the P-3F. 3 seconds to pickle, the southern gun opened up. No RWR scream, just incandescent tracers carving through the space the Hornet was entering, directed by a gunner with 11 days of cold muscle memory. 1,600 rounds every minute. Precision was irrelevant, he just needed to be close. Hard break into blowers as the window slammed shut, the bomb still clinging to its pylon. Mission scrubbed by a weapon system cheaper than a rusted-out sedan. On the roof, the missile tech read the pilot's panic. Heading, altitude, and the bank angle that betrayed where the jet would reappear. 11 days in, and the Iranians were still swinging. They were thinking 3 moves ahead. Raven 2 couldn't wait. The IL-76's engines were already gasping for air on the infrared sensor. That target would vanish if they spent another 60 seconds wrestling with a single anti-air gun. Raven 1 clawed for sky while his wingman committed to the heavy transport alone. 10,000 feet, 2,000 below leads aborted run, forced down by a targeting pod that had been hallucinating for 40 minutes. Crosshairs jerked past the wing route, overcompensated to the right, found the center line for a heartbeat, and the pilot mashed the pickle during that thin slice of stability. The entire kill chain rested on a brief moment of lucidity from a pod that had been failing since the border. The GBU-38 separated, tail fins snapping open as the GPS receiver reached out for its orbital gods. The signal it grabbed was already being strangled. The jamming didn't hit like a hammer. It was a slow poison. Noise drowning the frequency like static on a dying call, the position solution drifting as interference buried the signal. Fins twitched by a fraction, the jamming shoved back harder. The guidance countered. Every adjustment was a desperate wager between the fading satellite data and the static trying to bury it. 30 seconds of an invisible street fight across 12,000 feet of scorched spectrum. At 8,000 feet, the jamming hit a resonance. The bomb's perceived position jumped 11 meters sideways. Tail fins slammed to full deflection, fighting to find center through a constant, agonizing dance across every axis of flight. A tightrope walk where the wire never stays still. Suddenly, the MSA-2 rocketed from the rooftop. The operator tracked Raven 2's descent, waiting for the rear quarter where the engine nozzles were screaming their heat into the sky. The jet sensors caught the plume at 5 o'clock low. Raven 2 broke hard, turning his hottest signature away from the seeker's eyes. Dispensers spat MJU-53 flares, magnesium burning at 2,000 degrees, temporary suns designed to blind the thermal brain of the missile. The seeker looked at the sky and faced a choice. The flares burned with more spite, but the aircraft offered a larger meal for the seeker's hungry eyes. The high-G brake smeared the image faster than the sensor could refresh. The seeker's vision blurred. The missile bit on a flare and detonated 100 meters behind the tailpipe. Pilot alive, but his situational awareness was shattered, and he was blind to his own weapon. The GBU-38 was still falling through the basement. Finns fighting Chinese-made interference with every remaining second of life. From 20,000 feet, the Reaper watched the fuselage split open, the heavy transport's bones sagging sideways. The fuel that was supposed to feed a flight was now merely feeding a massive chemical fire. The transport crew died following a checklist while American jets circled above, unable to pull the trigger. That plane would never leave the concrete. The brake pushed Raven 2 south, straight into the ZU-23's kill zone. The same gun that had chased off Raven 1 30 seconds prior. A Soviet relic from 1960, purchased for the price of a pickup truck. The gunner already had his lead calculated. He'd studied both passes, solved the geometry in his head, and was now adjusting for a killing blow. Both barrels screamed, sending incandescent lead into the air the jet had occupied only a half-second before. At this range, the gunner was filling a house-sized volume with lead, forcing the Hornet to find the holes. Raven 2 danced through the stream, using random motion to make the gunner's ballistic math wrong by a few inches. Tracers in the mirrors and fuel levels dropping into a range where bingo felt like an understatement. Raven 1 banked from the northeast, carving an entirely fresh vector across the objective. That first run unmasked the southern CU-23's nest. Raven 2's scrap revealed exactly where the manpad operator was squinting. He tucked the maintenance hangar's bulk between his dive and the roof. Concrete and steel blinded the operator during those 3 critical seconds. The infrared sensor pinned the P-30 51 years old, a Burbank-born ghost of Lockheed's past. Iranian pilots mastered this beast at Moffett Field back when the Shah still held the keys. This skeleton survived a revolution on 23,000 man-hours and parts Lockheed stopped selling when Carter was in office. It harassed the Essex in 2019. American iron biting the hand that built it. Time for a lethal homecoming. Pickle. The GBU-38 dove into Chinese jamming. The interference tried to muffle the signal, but the Finns fought through 12,000 feet. Metal met wing root. Fuel cells bled fire. 50 years of keeping a zombie flying an aircraft its own creator had abandoned. Vaporized by a bomb forged 15 miles from the very factory that birthed the plane. One target left. The northern CU-23 barked as he rolled in, tracers clawing closer this time. That gunner was a quick study, adjusting his lead after watching 2 passes from the runway threshold. Raven 1 shimmied through the lead as his fuel state bled amber. He was bingo. That tanker over the Gulf of Oman was mandatory. It was the thin line between a trap on the Lincoln or a cold bath in the Arabian Sea. Every second over this tarmac was a debt he couldn't afford. But one bomb remained for one last legacy airframe. The C-130 filled his glass another Lockheed relic bought 50 years ago. He pickled. The tail kit wrestled the electronic screaming and punched the fuselage amidships. 3 for 3. Splash. If this carnage suited you, watch our other brief on B-2s pounding Iran back into the Stone Age. Out.